So I'd like to call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Bloomington Common Council of Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. And we have several items on our agenda tonight, as was just referred to us by the through the special session. We have ordinance 2115 through 2122, but not in that order. We have 2115 first, which is the technical corrections. Then we have ordinance 2116, which is changes to chapter 2 zoning districts. Then we move to ordinance 2119, which is regarding chapter 5 subdivision standards. Then we'll move to ordinance 2120, which is regarding changes to chapter 6 administration and procedures. Next, ordinance 2121, which concerns chapter 7 definitions. Ordinance 2117, which concerns chapter 3 use regulations. And ordinance 2118, which is concerning chapter 4 development standards and incentives. And if we still have time, the last one on our agenda is ordinance 2122, which is removal of the residential estate zoning. All right, so starting with ordinance 2115, which is the technical corrections. I believe we have Jackie Scanlon here from the Planning and Transportation Department. So take it away, Jackie.
Great, thank you.
Miss Scanlon, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I'll try my best. Development Services Manager, Planning and Transportation Department. And I have here with me tonight some of our current planners who can also help answer questions if you have any. So the first ordinance we're looking at tonight, 2115, is a technical corrections ordinance. So a little preview for all of the ordinances you'll see. I think this is common knowledge at this point, but the Planning and Transportation Department is proposing to complete the update of the Unified Development Ordinance and Zoning Map. And that was started after the 2018 Comprehensive Plan was approved. We updated the Unified Development Ordinance in 2019 through public process, and that was became effective in April of last year. And then since that time, we have been working with that new UDO and identifying portions of the code that may simply contain errors. That is mostly what this particular petition is about, but others will be changes where maybe something wasn't working quite right or wasn't exactly how it was intended, and or policies that we are trying to improve. So those are the types of petitions you'll be seeing from us, as well as an update to the official zoning map based on that comprehensive plan and new Unified Development Ordinance. So this first one is technical corrections. Let me share my screen here, just a second. Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
I think so, thank you. Again, there are 8 that we'll try to get to tonight, first being 2115. There are 16 proposed amendments that staff has identified. And I broke them up by chapter to be able to describe them. So the first group is from chapter 2, and the red line was in your packet, as well as a table that outlines the existing language and proposed language and a synopsis of why. So I will briefly go through these. The first here, oh, I'm sorry, this first one is incorrect. This is the first one on your table is actually just a reference in one of the two of our tables, 2-4 and 2-5, where the table right now is indicating that the first floor setback is different than for a side yard setback. When you add additional height, you have additional setbacks. And while the tables do indicate that, we thought it was kind of unclear, so we're adding an additional note. So that's the first change. And then we have in 2 tables appearing here in chapter 2, and then you'll see again in chapter 4. There are references for a setback in the RM district and a setback in the RH district, and they don't match. They should both say 15 feet, which is consistent with the other setbacks in similar districts, but the chapter 2 tables say 10 feet, which we think was just an error. And so we are proposing to change those both to 15 feet so that they would be synced with the other table in the ordinance, as well as the other districts with that similar regulation. Table 2-11, there is an error in the listing of minimum landscape area. It's listed as 25%, but should be 40 because they should add up to 100, and the impervious surface coverage allowance is 60, so 40 is the balance, and so that corrects that error. And then the last one here is basically just a physical citation in the code is slightly in the wrong place. It's referencing a table, and so we're moving it next to that. So again, this ordinance is mostly just about corrections. So 1 and 2 here, again, as I mentioned in the previous chapter, syncing those two tables with the RM and RH rear yard setbacks to what is consistent with the other districts, as well as consistent with each table. And then again, the 25% to 40% correction appears in this, this table as well. And then we added a row for side and rear parking setback to a table. Again, this is not adding a new regulation. It is just adding this information in a location that is not currently in the code, just for clarity. If people are looking for that information here, it seemed that it might be appropriate to add that as well. The next change that we're proposing is, you'll recall a number of years ago, we went through a process of changing when sidewalk installation is required for new single family housing and for new single family residences. And some of that language did not make it into the new code. So we are proposing to add that back in. That was not intentionally excluded that we know of, wasn't intentionally excluded by us and wasn't discussed at the hearings. So this will revert back to the language that was approved by council a number of years ago, where only certain single family residences, for example, those on classified roads or adjacent to existing sidewalk, will be required to put in new sidewalk. And it also extends this language to duplexes and triplexes. The next is a reference in code that talks about how we should look at fractional numbers related to rounding up or down based on the what type of provision it is. This language is similar but a little bit different to language that's in chapter 1 that talks about fractional numbers. So we're proposing to just remove this here because it creates confusion and they don't sync properly. And the way that we have been doing it for a long time and the way that it's described in chapter is the way that it's described in chapter 1. So we are proposing to remove that reference. The next is EFIS is referenced as a type of material to be used in a specific architectural, in a specific architectural, I believe it's secondary materials only. We are not proposing again to change that regulation at all. We're only proposing to move it from listed as a wood grain material to listed under the stucco section. We think that it is more like a stucco product, and that was just an error that it was included with the wood materials. And then the last for this chapter is a typo where IN should have been listed as PO. And so IN is not district cab anymore, and we are proposing to change that. The only change in chapter 6 is, if you saw in the red line, it's basically just that a graphic was missing a label. It's still red insert text here. And this, we are proposing to add the language that is in all of the other similar tables throughout the code. Common expiration and revocation procedures apply. And then for chapter 7, this is in the definition of manufactured home dwelling. We accidentally re-referenced the same definition where we should have been referencing a dwelling mobile home. So we'll be just changing one word at the end of the definition from manufactured to mobile to make that correction. And then the last one we have is that the code in some places says change of use and in other places says change in use. So just to make those consistent, we will be changing all of those to change in use. So those are the 16 that we have For technical corrections, Plan Commission recommended approval 9-0. Answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scanlon. Are there any questions on Ordinance 2105, the technical corrections? Ms. Scanlon, if you could unshare,
Oh,
then I could
yes.
see more of my colleagues. Thank
Sure.
you.
So you can figure it out. Sorry.
Thank you. Are there any questions about this ordinance? Okay, I don't see any. In that case, last call, now that I can see Councilmember Boland, any questions on Ordinance 2105, the technical corrections? Yes, Councilmember Sims.
Not a question, and this may just be a technicality, and maybe I'm wrong. 21-15 instead of 2105.
Thank you very much. Yes, you are quite right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, seeing no questions on Ordinance 2115, I don't know why I keep doing that. 2115. Let's go to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment specifically now only on Ordinance 2115, which is the technical corrections to the UDO? If you're a member of the public and would like to comment, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can type a note in the chat to the meeting host. And Mr. Lucas is our meeting host. Do you see any requests for comment?
You see two hands raised at the moment. And the first hand, I believe, was Elizabeth Gallman, who should now be ready to comment.
Ms. Gallman, you can go ahead and comment on Ordinance 21.
No, thank you. I raised my hand when I checked in by accident, but
Oh.
no, sorry, I don't.
Okay,
I'm too up to date on this Zoom procedure.
no problem. Thank you.
No comment. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Mr. Lucas, who else do we have?
Next up is Peter, who should now be able to unmute.
Yes, I have. Thank you. Peter Dorfman from the Near West Side. My comment on this ordinance really has to do with the fact that we're considering it first. The City Council has now committed itself to the same error that the Plan Commission made in setting the order of this debate. The council, I guess, feels that it can put some points on the board by taking the easy stuff first. And that's the approach that the Plan Commission took. It really only served to delay comment from the public on the thing that we all know we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the plexus. And by pushing the plexus to the end of the process rather than dealing with them first, the only purpose that it really serves is to stifle public comment on the matters that are most germane. The plexes hang over each one of these amendments. Each amendment means one thing if we have plexes coming and another thing if we don't. I would strongly urge the council to reconsider the order of this proceeding to deal with the plexus first. Do the hard stuff first, and then we can deal with each of the additional amendments in the right context. That's all I needed to say. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else in the public like to make a comment on Ordinance 2115, the technical corrections? Okay, I don't see any. Do you, Mr. Lucas?
No, I don't.
All right, we'll come back to council members. Are there any additional questions or final comments on Ordinance 2115? Or I would also entertain a do pass recommendation.
Move to pass.
Second.
All right, a do pass recommendation has been made. So I'll just call on my colleagues as I see them on the screen. Councilmember Sims,
Yes.
Councilmember Sandberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Scambaluri,
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty,
Yes.
Councilmember Boland,
Abstain.
and Councilmember Rallo.
Yes.
And I will vote yes. So the do pass recommendation on ordinance 2115 is 801. We will move on to my agenda. Ordinance 2116. And Ms. Scanlon, fill us in on ordinance 2116. Ms. Scanlon, are you there?
There we go. It's my first time on Zoom. Okay. Chapter 2, sorry, zoning districts. We have one correction here for 2116. The petition clarifies, just by adding the word all, that the facade of a building facing the street above 3 stories has to meet the step back requirement. Again, maybe could have been in maybe could have made it into the technical 21-15. But basically just trying to clarify for staff so that it's clear when we're working with petitioners that the entirety of the floors have to be stepped back, not just a portion. And that is the only clarification in this ordinance, and Plan Commission recommended approval 9-0.
Thank you. Ms. Scanlon, can you explain for lay people out there what is a step back?
Sure. So in our downtown district, in our overlay areas, we have an upper floor facade step back so that if you are building above a certain height, the floors above floor 2 typically have to be 15 feet pushed back from the front of the building. So you can see that in some buildings we have downtown, like the Alley Works building where the top is pushed back, the city side buildings at 3rd and Washington, so that the interface of the building with the pedestrian realm is still human scale between 2 and 3 stories, and then additional stories are allowed, but they have to be pushed back from that right-of-way line so that if you were standing immediately next to the building, you wouldn't actually see them at all. So this just clarifies that because the wording changed a little bit, and we wanted to make sure that it's clear to a builder that the entirety of that floor would have to be stepped back. And this is also supposed to reflect the historic pattern of our downtown in most places where those are the sizes of the buildings that we have. And so the step back is related also to those historic buildings and where they're located.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on ordinance 2116? This one is pretty short. Any questions from colleagues? All right, seeing none, we will go to the public. If there's any member of the public who would like to speak on ordinance 2116, which is just clarifying the setback requirements downtown, please use the raise hand function in Zoom or type a note in the chat to the meeting host.
I do see one hand raised at the moment with the screen name iPhone Greg Rago, who should now be able to unmute.
Okay, you got me?
Yes.
Copy that. Okay. Once again, this is another public comment that I'm not really comfortable with moving the main meat of the agenda way to the back. I think this whole process has been kind of mired in a little bit of distractions, the election last year, the pandemic, whatever else. And so it'd be nice to see a little more transparency, or at least us in the public realize exactly what's going on. At least some of us do. I think there's a lot of other people that aren't aware of that. And you, as the city council members, are very well aware of that with your political posturing. I wish That wasn't what's going on, but it is, and you're aware of that. So anyway, we'll see what happens at the ballot box in the next election. But I don't plan on voting with my feet. Plan on voting with my ballot. So that's my opinion. And thank you for listening.
I would like to clarify for all members of the public that we are taking public comment on the amendments in the agenda that was publicized and noticed earlier. So please confine your comments to the items on the agenda. It is our prerogative and the president's prerogative to set the agenda. It has been set. That is not going to change at this point. So are there any comments on the actual amendment regarding setbacks?
I don't see any other requests for comment at the moment.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas. Any final comments or questions from council members on Ordinance 2116? Then I will entertain a do pass recommendation.
Move to pass.
Second.
All right. And again, I will just call on my colleagues as I see them. They have moved around, so it's not always the same. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Boland.
Yes.
And Councilmember Rollo.
Yes.
All right, that do pass recommendation receives a vote of 9-0. And we'll move on to Ordinance 2119. And this is on Subdivision Standards, Chapter 5. Ms. Scanlon, please go ahead.
Okay, for 21-19, this is our subdivision standards chapter. We had 5 here in this chapter, as was just stated. The first 2 are located in Table 5-3. This is for our traditional subdivision development standards, and they're related to tree plot width and sidewalk multi-use path width. They currently read 7 feet and 5 feet respectively, but we would like to add a reference to the transportation plan so that they'll read per transportation plan or 7 feet, whichever is greater, and per transportation plan or 5 feet, whichever is greater, because the transportation plan sometimes calls for more than the 7 and 5, and we want to give deference to that work that was done with the plan. So basically adding 7 and 5 as the minimum there. And then the third here is something, again, that used to be in the old code, that all new residential lots shall have frontage on a public street or right of way. That used to specifically say all new single family lots, and that was taken out inadvertently in the conversion, we believe. And so we would like to add single family back in, as well as duplex, triplex, and floorplex. This guarantees that anything of those 4 scales that is built, lots that are created for those 4 uses have to be on a public or on a public street, or they can be part of cottage development. And that is consistent, again, with what the old code was required for single family. The fourth item here is that we would like to add back in from the old code a reference to common area easements for our environmentally restricted areas, so including karst features, riparian buffers, floodways, wetlands, and forested areas, that if you are doing a plat and you have those types of areas, that you must put those in common area. We have found that that is much easier to ensure their protection into the future than not requiring that, where then they become on privately owned lots piecemeal, and it's much harder for us to track, and for other departments such as CBU to be able to track those types of easements. It's easier if we can get those in common area. And then the last is that when the new transportation plan was approved, the street classification names were changed, and one was that neighborhood streets are now called local streets. And so you will see this appear a couple times in these proposals, that one time in this chapter, the term neighborhood appears, and we are proposing to change that to local so that it will match the terminology from the transportation plan. So again, Plan Commission, obviously staff recommended these changes because we wrote them, and then Plan Commission recommended approval 9-0. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Are there any questions on Ordinance 2119? All right, seeing none, we will go to the public. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on Ordinance 2119, the changes to Chapter 5 subdivision standards? And again, please narrow your comments and only address Ordinance 2119 at this point, not the whole UDO. And of course, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can send a chat message to the meeting host. Mr. Lucas, who do we have?
I see one hand raised at the moment from Margaret Clements, who should now be able to unmute.
Hello, this is Margaret Clements, and I'm concerned both as a citizen and as a member of the Transportation Committee, the BMC MPO, that we're making our streets undrivable and inaccessible to a large portion of the population. And this particular amendment will further that demise of streets that the public pays for. And I think it's rather unfair, especially for the elderly and for the non-bike riders and the non-walkers. I think it's makes the city inaccessible to a large portion of the community. And I really am opposed to this. Thank you.
All right, is there anybody else in the public who would like to comment on this particular ordinance 2119? Mr. Lucas, are you seeing any?
Yes, I do see one other hand from Wendy Bernstein, who should now be able to unmute.
Thanks. This is just a quick question. I'm not sure I'm asking it at the right moment, but do existing streets like Hillside Drive end up under these same standards? Are the standards for new developments, or are they also in retrospect for retro whatever for existing streets that are already pretty narrow?
All right, we will try to get the answer to that question.
Thank you.
Any other public comments at this point? Do you see any, Mr. Lucas?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right. Well, back to council then, and I will just check with Ms. Scanlon on Ms. Bernstein's question, whether, I suppose here we're talking about tree plot width and sidewalk width.
Sure, I think so. So this is for new subdivision.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Are there any comments on ordinance 2119 from my council colleagues? If not, I will accept a do pass recommendation.
Move to pass.
Second.
All right. And again, just for the benefit of the public, these do pass recommendations are kind of a straw poll vote. It's the initial reaction, and the final vote will actually come at a regular session, I expect next week. So anyway, do pass has been moved and seconded. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Councilmember Volin.
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Rollo.
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. So that's a do pass recommendation 9-0. And we will move on. If I can go back to my agenda. I believe next we have ordinance 2120 about chapter 6, administration and procedures. Back to Ms. Galen.
Thank you. 2120 is related to Chapter 6, Administration and Procedures. We have 6 proposed amendments with this chapter. This is the, with this petition, this is the first you're seeing where 2 were added by Plan Commission. Those 2 were actually staff that we asked them to sponsor. So all 6 proposed and supported by staff. They can be split into 3 groups. The first is major site plan review. We are proposing to change the minimum thresholds for those petitions that are listed as major site plans in the code. When something is listed as a major site plan, it must be reviewed by the Plan Commission, even if it meets all the requirements, even if it is required to be approved by right approval. It still has to go to Plan Commission for public review and comment. We are proposing, excuse me just a second, to modify 3 of those standards. And so the first is that currently it is listed in the code that expansions, alterations, or modifications that increase the total number of existing dwelling units on a lot by 10% or more must go to the Plan Commission. We are proposing to remove that. The way that we have seen it in action is actually mostly only discouraging smaller smaller apartment developments from adding on units. For example, this would require that if you had a small building and a 3 unit and you wanted to add, or a 2 unit and you wanted to add a third, then technically that would have to go to Plan Commission. That was not the intent here, of course, to have a bunch of small projects added to the agenda. The second is that expansions, alterations, or modifications that increase the gross floor area of an existing structure by more than 10,000 square feet or more than 25%, whichever is less. Again, what we have found in talking with potential petitioners and petitioners that have actually gone forward is that that has shown to be a very low bar. And what it is doing is requiring that petitions that, again, are by right and have to be approved go to Plan Commission. The neighbors within 300 feet or immediately adjacent, 2 people deep, are also notified. It's created quite a bit of confusion on a couple of cases where when something goes to Plan Commission, often people kind of assume that, of course, there is something that can be done there if they do not like the petition, and that is not the case here. While, of course, we want to encourage transparency and have appropriate cases go to Plan Commission to be vetted in the public, we do think that these thresholds are probably proving to be too low. And additionally, with developments containing 30 or more units, we're proposing to increase that to 50 so that those developments would still go, but that the smaller developments could be approved at staff level. The fourth change is a change to the floodplain regulations. Currently in code, there are requirements related to additions or lawful non-conforming structures receiving permits. And one of those restrictions is that you can get one only throughout time. We've seen that be kind of harmful to some buildings where they're trying to do, for example, interior remodel. And if they've done one ever, then they can't do any more technically. So what we have done is sync the language with the language that the state uses to regulate additions and alterations in the floodplain. And then the last 2 are related to bonds. When the city does projects, although legal has advised that it's unlikely that the language is probably okay as it is, we wanted to make it explicit in the code that city projects are not responsible for providing public improvement or erosion control bonds. An entity cannot bond to itself, which is why legal said, we don't necessarily have to change it, but we would like that to be clear. We would just like the language to be clearer. So that is what those 2 amendments do. And Plan Commission recommended approval 9-0 on these 6 as well. I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Galen. Are there any questions about ordinance 2120? Councilmember Scambolari.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Scanlon, can you talk more about the unit threshold and the move from 30 to 50? Why not 40? Why not 60? Just if you could talk through that.
Yes. So we kind of 50 was kind of just a number that we chose that we thought sounded more reasonable based on projects proposals that we've seen, where 50 kind of ends up being a threshold where the project sizes that are in the 40s or lower do seem potentially less impactful. And so that's kind of where we decided maybe 30 was a little bit low, as we have seen potential projects come forward in that range. And so we decided we wanted to raise it a little bit, but not much. Again, we are still trying to capture projects to go to Plan Commission so that they could be publicly vetted, but trying to find that middle ground of you know, what things are useful for them to spend their time on, as well as what things are, what kind of projects the public want to be involved in, and that 50, the size of that seemed appropriate to us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'd like to follow up on that question, actually. With all of these, the three, I believe there were three proposals to change certain development requests from a major review to a minor review. So the major would go to Plan Commission, the minor would not. In all three cases, so expansion of 10% or more units, increase in units, 10,000 square feet, or a 30 unit minimum threshold rather than the 50 unit. Does this apply also if the development is adjacent to a residential zone, like one of the R zones?
Yes, these requirements, and anyone can jump in, correct me if I'm wrong, but these requirements apply to all site plans. So the way we've seen them shake out so far, the one for 10,000, for example, it's not residential, it's commercial. I mean, it could be residential, but we've seen it as, for example, an office building on College Mall Road that was doing an addition up, so not changing the footprint at all, and doing 2 additional stories, so it was over the minimum. There is residential near there, so they were able to come out and speak, but the Plan Commission had to approve the petition. So that kind of created some confusion for both the petitioner, who now was having to go through this public process for a by right proposal, and then for the neighbors who were disappointed, obviously, because they were worried and concerned about the project and not wanting it to get through, and so trying to appeal to the Plan Commissioners to deny it, which they couldn't do. And so we are feeling like we've also had discussions about other projects where additions are wanting to be done, that this is probably too low for what we would typically think could be useful on the Plan Commission agenda.
Jackie, and also point out, that there were several sections in the comprehensive plan that talked about removing barriers to development, improving predictability within the review process. And so this goes to further some of those goals that were talked about in the comprehensive plan to, simplify the process and make it more straightforward for folks.
And that, I believe, was Eric Gerlich from.
That was Eric Gerlich. Thank you, Senior Zoning.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Eric Gerlich, Senior Zoning Planner.
Thank you. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is if there's a development of 30 apartment buildings next to a largely residential, single family, maybe duplex neighborhood, people want to know about that. People want to see what is that going to look like? How is that going to impact me? So how are people notified? So if we approve this and it's, the threshold is 50, what buffers or what notification is still going to be in place?
If it's a new development and it's still, for example, hits the threshold of the 15,000 square foot of gross floor area, there are other existing thresholds for major site plan review as well. that it could still trigger. Additionally, there are two written into so for example, the 15,000 square foot gross floor area, that's also an automatic major site plan review. There are two at the bottom that basically, if there's unusual size, complexity, or potential significant unanticipated impacts, we can push those up. And that one's directly related to impacts on the city or surrounding neighborhoods. So I think we would always err on the side of, if the two zoning districts didn't seem compatible and it was a large project, we would refer that up. And then the last, again, is allows the director to be able to push that up as well. So I guess I would say we can look for next week. I could just be blanking, and so anyone can jump in. If there are other triggers that would send it up, we would, of course, still have the neighborhood transition standards would still be in place, but I think you're more asking for like how could the public give input? But yes, neighborhood transition standards are in place where if you are developing immediately adjacent to single family, there are certain height and setback restrictions that you have to meet. So a 30 unit multifamily immediately adjacent to existing single family would probably be pretty unlikely, just because of those restrictions. And even if so, would be set back quite a bit. But I can make sure for next week or before next week, let you know if there are other triggers that would, what the other triggers might be for that type of example, to have those go to the Plan Commission anyway.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from council members? Councilmember Smith.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Scanlon. The question I would like to ask is, it seems to me that what we're saying is it makes it that the developer can increase or build a larger apartment structure without public input. Is that kind of correct?
Yes, it's moving the threshold up. That's correct.
So is there any recourse to the public if they go? So now that the public had a recourse if it was 30, and correct me if I'm wrong, and now unless it's over 50, there won't be a public hearing on that.
Well, that's part of the problem. They don't have a recourse at 30. They have the ability to come and speak to the Plan Commission about their concerns, but the projects here are by right. So the Plan Commission can't deny them. So I think that's kind of where we were trying to find the middle of wanting them to be seen in public and then not wanting to bring so many forward. It does create confusion, like you just said. People do think that then, oh, you can go to Plan Commission and maybe stop the project. And that's not the case, because the projects are by right. If, they were requesting variances or something, then you could go to the Board of Zoning Appeals if you didn't, and make the argument that they don't meet the findings for those. But if the project meets all the requirements of the UDO, even though it has to go to Plan Commission, they have to approve it. And so it kind of creates an awkward situation sometimes for other members of the public who do have an expectation that if something is going to a public hearing, it can be stopped basically or altered. And that isn't the case with these.
And please tell me and the general public about when it's by right in this situation, that means what?
That means that they are meeting all of the requirements of code. So there's nothing, I think that there has been I think over time we've created kind of a culture of, because we used to have what we used to refer to as waivers, then we were calling deviations in the downtown area, where Plan Commission was kind of helping petitioners in our downtown overlays, where you could get deviations or waivers from some requirements if you were doing some other things. And so there could be movement within the approval, where where outside of the downtown where we see less, less contentious development, that isn't an option. And that's even less likely with this new code. So they would be meeting all of the development standards and the use standards, and that's what would be going forward to Plan Commission, which is why they wouldn't have the opportunity to turn it down.
Thank you very much for answering that question.
No problem.
Any other questions from council members? All right, seeing none, we will go to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak on Ordinance 2120, the revisions to Chapter 6, Administration and Procedures? You can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can send a chat message to the meeting host.
I see 2 raised hands at the moment, and I believe the first hand was the B Square Beacon, who should now be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. First, I know there's no guarantee that questions from the public have to get an answer, but I appreciate the chance to ask them anyway. So thanks in advance if this question does get answered. So the change from a 30 unit threshold to a—
I'm sorry, could you give your full name, please?
Sure, Dave Askins with the B Square Beacon.
Thank you.
The change from a 30 unit threshold to a 50 unit threshold was, it would not have impacted the hotel conversion that was approved by the Plan Commission last night, because that was an 85 unit project. Do we have any idea of how many petitions over the last however many years, records have been kept, would have escaped Plan Commission review if the threshold had been 50 units instead of 30? That's the question. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
And the next raised hand I saw was screen name iPhone Greg Rago, who should now be unmuted.
Yeah, this is Greg Rago again. Thanks for taking my call. It seems like this is meant for, as you say, middle ground for homeowners as well as developers / business owners. But it seems to me this is favors more toward the business owner and developer. Now I realize it's kind of basically for on the outskirts of town, but that's just my comment. If I'm wrong with that, if somebody has a fact that they can tell me and set me straight, I'd appreciate that. But that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or I'm sorry, comments from the public? I see a couple more hands.
Yes, next up is Margaret Clements, who should now be able to unmute.
Hi, this is Margaret Clements again, and I would just like to encourage you to try to keep stringent controls over wanton development. That we have a small community and a sensitive community, sensitive to a lot of external forces. Perhaps not, there aren't, I don't think, comparable towns in the United States that could claim as much external pressure as we do. And the only control that we have as a community over a future that we would like to see ourselves to help us maintain not only a livable town, but a lovable town, is our zoning. And zoning restrictions, although they're inconvenient for builders, and ordinance restrictions, although they're inconvenient for builders, I think the public has a right in a community with this much external pressure to have opportunities to express their desires and to have some of their wishes for lovability and livability fulfilled. And having administrative hearings, increasing the thresholds by which a corporation or a builder or developer can come in and do things by right, just relinquishes control over the future of the city that we want to become beyond, the next 4 years, beyond the next 8 years, for a much longer term. And so I would encourage you to take that responsibility very seriously that it isn't just for the current holders of these offices to make these regulations and changes. It is really for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
See a hand raised by Peter, I believe Peter Dorfman, who should now be able to unmute.
Yes, hi, Peter Dorfman again. I wanted to comment on this one because I have a tendency to sound a little bit negative in these hearings. This is one area of ordinance, this whole notion of transition between neighborhoods, where I actually have a pretty high level of confidence in what the city's been doing. I wanted to suggest if planners are open to changes in this particular set of requirements, I think what most homeowners on the edge of a neighborhood are most concerned about is building height. People don't want to lose their sunlight, and they have a sense that large buildings looming over their neighborhood are off-putting. So I guess there are a number of places where you could think about tightening these requirements a little bit. I just wanted to suggest that when you do, you pay particular attention to building height. That's all.
All right, thank you. Does anybody else in the public want to make a comment on Ordinance 2120? You can use the raise hand function in Zoom or the chat, typing a chat message to the meeting host. Do you see any, Mr. Lucas?
I don't. I do see two.
There we go.
Wendy Bernstein should be able to unmute.
Thanks. As far as I understand it, the reason for giving developers so many by right options is to decrease the demands on the planning department or the planning commission or various organs of the city, so that they're not in constant meetings between neighbors and developers. But I just want to echo the fact that so many things are being placed as by right that our rights as citizens feel pretty threatened in terms of defining how we live and how our town develops. Thanks.
Thank you.
We also have Elizabeth Gallman, who should be ready to comment.
On mute. I would like to say that I agree with the comments the other speakers have made here, and that basically what's overlooked here is that the interests of the developers are not going to be the same as the community. They're going to put a project in and somebody's going to manage it, and then they're going to go home or they're going to stay. But they're basically here for economic reasons. And the citizens ought to be able, I mean, to increase something from 30 to 50 is almost to double it without comment from the community, and is the assumption that the developer has a normal right to increase by almost half his work. And he's not working for the community, he's working on an economic basis for himself. And I think that there's not enough appreciation for what this community might want if it could stop developers from doubling their output on the spot by right, period. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is Cynthia, who should be able to unmute.
Great, thank you. This is Cynthia Bretheim. I just wanted to make the point that the public is showing up. The public has shown up to public commission meeting, planning commission meetings when they feel that a change would negatively impact the neighbors would negatively impact the character of the neighborhood. And it's already been shown that that doesn't really count for much. And that's really unfortunate. And so I hope that citizen input would be valued more. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I don't see any additional requests at the moment.
All right, we'll come back to the council for, first of all, are there any follow-up questions? Councilmember Scambolery.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate this discussion and the comments from the public too. I appreciate Mr. Askin's question. How many projects, say in the last 5 years, would have avoided, and I'm paraphrasing, would have avoided Plan Commission review had the 50 threshold been in place before? I think that's an interesting question. I would actually put a finer point on it. And how many projects would have avoided Plan Commission review and not had it triggered by one of the other thresholds? Because Ms. Scanlon, I think if I remember correctly, you said there are any number of thresholds that could trigger a plan review. And I don't expect you to have those numbers now, but perhaps
So we will look into that, yes.
Yes, so perhaps by next weekend you could, or next week you could share that.
Yes.
So thank you.
Yeah. And Councilperson Piedmont Smith, if I can make one clarification, kind of related to the comments. What this proposal is doing is not proposing to change whether or not something is by right. Those regulations already exist. They're in the code. This proposal is proposing to say which by right projects have to be approved by Plan Commission. So if they are by right, then they meet all of the requirements of the zoning code. This is not changing what those requirements are. This is saying that projects that are smaller would not have to go to be seen at the Plan Commission. Again, because they're by right, they have to be approved. So we're not actually proposing to change any of the development standards. Just a few of the comments seem to maybe have that confused. Thanks.
Thank you. Other follow-up questions from colleagues?
And I just, I'm sorry, excuse me, Councilman.
Mr. Gerlich, yes.
I just wanted, thank you, Eric Grulich again. I just wanted to point out that under the previous UDO, for residential, the threshold was 100 dwelling units in terms of what had to go to the Plan Commission. So, when we reduced it in the current UDO to 30, that was a drastic reduction. So we are, as Mrs. Scanlon pointed out, we're, picking a middle ground going back between, that 100 that was the threshold previously to 50 units. So, we had been operating under that 100 unit threshold for 14 years with the UDO. So we're just trying to up that a little bit. And as Mrs. Scanlon pointed out, we're not changing the standards that it's regulated by. We're not changing how many units are allowed on a property, just what has to go to the Plan Commission. The transition zone standards that were just implemented provide a substantial amount of improved protection for projects up against residential neighborhoods that wasn't in the UDO previously. So there have certainly been a lot of improvements.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, I think it deserves a little bit more explanation here because, when I hear the phrase by right, what I mean it to understand is that they don't have to go to the Plan Commission. That doesn't require an approval. But you're saying that if a project is, before it was over 100, now it's over 50 with this amendment, then it does have to go to the Plan Commission. Do they not have to vote to approve it? I don't understand what by right means in that respect.
By right means that it meets all the requirements. So for typical things, such as like when we talk about a single family house being built or the like Plex discussion we're having, by right does mean, can also mean synonymous with not having to go to a public process. But our code requires that certain things, including site plans, have to be approved by Plan Commission if they're over certain thresholds. And we don't approve, they can't approve a project that doesn't meet all of the requirements. They can't deny a project that does meet all of the requirements.
So, okay, but I mean, so in other words, what you're saying is a project of say 55 units the site plan has to be approved by Plan Commission, but the project itself does not.
The site plan has to be approved by Plan Commission. That is the project. It has to be, the code says some things can be done at staff level and some things have to be approved by Plan Commission. Other things, you know, such as rezones have to be approved by this body. And it doesn't split those up by whether or not they're by right.
I mean, I hate to admit it, but I don't think I have gotten any better of an answer than not that.
Sure. No, that's
not
fine.
that you're not. I just don't understand it. Is what
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Again, I think it goes back to, and I could be wrong. So if anyone jump in if you think I'm wrong, but I think it goes back to the way we've seen projects go to Plan Commission and Council in the past, where there's negotiation and there are waivers and deviations. And the new code, as Mr. Grulich pointed out, is supposed to be more clean cut and more predictable. So a lot of that is gone. So if you are bringing forward a site plan to Plan Commission, it meets code 100%. They can't allow you to do things. They don't have very much wiggle. They don't have wiggle room. So now if you're proposing a site plan in the city of Bloomington, it's by right, unless you're requesting variances, in which case you go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And then that's when a neighborhood could be involved.
So if you're not requesting variances, why does a site plan even need to go to Plan Commission?
That's a good question. So it was discussed in the public hearings when we did this in 2019 and 2020. The reason that they were written this way, some agreed and some didn't, was just for more public exposure of projects so that people could see what was being done and have them be publicly vetted, not so that they could be publicly denied.
Okay, so the part that I'm missing has been that by right does not mean doesn't need to go to Plan Commission. By right simply means doesn't need to be approved by Plan Commission.
By right means no one, yes, that there aren't findings available for whatever the approving body is, Plan Commission or staff, that allow it to be denied. If they meet all of those findings, then they are by right.
Okay.
And we can maybe have a more better legal description for you next week when our legal representative will be able to be here, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember Flaherty, I think you are next.
I'll pass, thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Sandberg.
Thanks. As a member of both the Plan Commission and the BZA, it's always good if we can try to put things in layman's terms. This is why this revision of our Unified Development Ordinance is so very critical, because the code, what gets written as law, is what the Plan Commission has to go by. When something is reviewed by the Plan Commission, we look at it very, very carefully. We ask all the good questions. Public comment is a part of those meetings. But when it comes right down to it, our hands are tied by what the code says. If it is by right, then a builder can build what is allowed by code. And that is why it's so critical for us to look at by right and for us to look at conditional use. Then if there are any kinds of issues that go to the BZA, which I am also a member, I have not served on that very long. I'm not as familiar, but there are certain things we have to respect too. We can't just arbitrarily decide things like if a great amount of the public shows up and they really have a protest. If it says by code something is allowable, then even the BZA's hands are tied. And so that's why writing this code is of utmost importance, to make sure it does respect the public's right to know and the public's right to have some recourse if things are developing that are not in accordance with their livability or what their concerns may be, whether it's the building height next door and the shading of their gardens or what have you. So that's all I want to say about what's coming before us with respect to making sure that we do have allowance for the public to be heard and respected. Thank you.
Councilmember Rollo.
Ms. Scanlon, you offered a answer to Councilmember Vullen, regarding what's the purpose of the public hearing if it is by right, and you replied, and I agree, that it offers a chance for the public to be notified of what is occurring. But isn't it true too that the public hearing, even if what is proposed is by right, that there might be information that comes from the public that might lead to a better outcome? So for instance, I could think of a development that might have, air HVAC units or something like that, that may, if the public were to come to a meeting, express their concern about noise or some, visual impairment that, it might result in a berm or a tree buffer or fencing and so forth. So, and that might influence the outcome. Because the developer may well decide that it's good to be a good neighbor, and because this is a public hearing, it allows that sort of interaction. Is that part of the process as well, as you see it?
Yes, I think that's accurate, which I think is why we, especially for this one, aren't proposing to, are just proposing to move the threshold and not anywhere near as high as it used to be, because yes, those types of things can happen for sure.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Councilmember Volin.
Yeah, I want to thank Councilmember Rallo for asking that clarifying question. It's led to another one for me. So I guess, what I've written down is that, to me, so far, the definition of by right seems to be that Plan Commission may be required to review a project, but no longer means that Plan Commission has discretion to approve or reject a project. Is that the right way of putting it?
Yes, that I think, and like the way Councilperson Sandberg described it, yes, these are projects in which they do not have discretion.
So I guess then the next question would be, to follow up on Councilman Varallo's question, what would be the mechanism by which a legitimate concern held by the public and staff and the Plan Commission, what would be the Plan Commission's mechanism for if they only have to review the project, can they delay it? Can they force a change? Doesn't that require a vote of the Plan Commission?
They can't force a change outside of what's required by code. So if it's something that code covers, then hopefully staff would have already caught that and it would be included. So like for some of the examples, Councilperson Rallo mentioned, for visible HVACs or things like that. Those are things we've tried to write in, and that's what Mr. Grulich was trying to say. We've tried to improve the base standards so that the issues we've heard over time have been addressed, like for example, with the neighborhood transition district. So things that are outside of those purviews, the Plan Commission wouldn't be able to require those. I think what Councilperson Rallo is describing would be more of the, like he's saying, wanting to be a good neighbor, where a developer would know they're moving into this area and they would have to be willing to, address the concerns of the neighbor. And to his point, yes, that may only happen at a public hearing. And we do see that happen sometimes.
So the upshot of the newly existing rule is that if there is in other words, there's no longer sort of a case-by-case vote, that if there's a type of condition that we see come forward in a petition that a neighborhood, say, or an interest group finds to be objectionable, their recourse is to change code, which is something that Plan Commission can affect, but that if a petition currently meets code, there's no exceptions anymore.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
And previously, those exceptions only existed in the downtown as well.
So now they exist throughout the city.
No, they don't exist. I'm saying when you're saying, you said now they cannot make exceptions or changes. Before, they could only do that in the overlays.
I see.
Now it's
so even now the overlays are not accepted.
Correct.
All petitions have to meet the more stringent code.
Yes.
But there's also no. It sort of removes some influence of the Plan Commission.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions from my colleagues? What about comments? Are there any comments on Ordinance 2120? Councilmember Flaherty?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate the discussion we had and the comments. It seems like some of the confusion that Ms. Scanlon kind of referenced in her initial presentation, we could see that in at play tonight, because I think, again, kind of clarifying on the conversation, the only thing that's changing with these is which set of eyes ensures that the permitted use or by right use meets every aspect of the code. Whether it's city reviewing a project or the plan commission reviewing a project, the standard is the exact same. Nothing has changed. It is, does this meet code as a permitted use, and should we pass it? So I think there was maybe a misunderstanding that this is increasing the or lowering barriers to permitted uses, and again, that's just not the case. So I think this is pretty reasonable. I do appreciate also Councilmember Rallo's question and insightful comments about even if there's no enforcement mechanism, sometimes a simple conversation about development that's happening could lead to more positive outcomes. And I think on balance, that's a good thing too. So I'm glad that's still part of our code. And I think that's it for me. Thanks.
Councilmember Rallo.
Yes, just to say thanks for that clarification, Councilmember Flaherty, and I'll be passing this evening just to consider the stringency of the threshold requiring early opposed, but I'm going to consider it a bit further.
Any other comments from council members? All right. Do we have a do pass recommendation?
Move do pass.
Second.
All right. Councilmember Sandberg.
Pass.
Councilmember Smith.
Pass.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
Councilmember Rallo.
Pass.
Councilmember Scambaluri.
Pass.
Councilmember Boland.
Yes.
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
And I will pass as well. So that received a vote of 405 as a do pass recommendation. And we will move right along. I can bring up my agenda. What do we have next? 2121.
Yes.
This is about Chapter 7 definitions.
Correct.
Ms. Scanlon.
Ordinance 2121. This is referring to Chapter 7 definitions. There are 8 proposed amendments. 7 came from staff and 1 was added by a plan commissioner at the hearings, and they can be described separately as amended and new. So there are 6 existing definitions that that the plan commission is proposing to amend. The first is related to the definition of building or structure primary. The definition changed slightly, and we want to make sure that it's clear, as has been practiced in Bloomington for a long time, that you can have more than one primary use and primary structure on your lot. And so we would be adding the phrase to the definition. Currently, it says a building or structure in which is conducted the primary use on the lot, and we would be changing that to any primary use that's a permitted use, so that multiple buildings on a lot with different uses could exist, which we obviously have all over town now. The second is changing the definition of multifamily to incorporate a use that we used to have in the code. So the code was dwelling upper floor residential. That was removed in the new code, but the type of development that is, which is like an apartment above a building, for example, on the square, is now not defined. And so we would like to add those to the multifamily definition. And so instead of right now, multifamily defines any development with 5 or more dwelling units. We would like to just change that to 1, and then it has in the current definition and would in the future definition, the exclusion of our other residential uses. So for example, if you had 3 units but you met our definition of triplex, then you'd be a triplex. If you have a building downtown with commercial on the first floor and 3 units above, then you would be considered multifamily. So that's why we're asking to clarify that, because we have kind of lost those second story units in our definitions currently. The third is to sync the definition of family with the ADU definition that was approved in the 2019-2020 update. At that time, council decided to allow for a family unit to be one family unit to be allowed in the main structure and one family unit to be allowed in the accessory structure. That was debated and then added into code in the ADU section. But we neglected to change the ADU reference in the definition of family, which says that it can only be one dwelling unit in both units. So we would be syncing that with the definition of ADU so that, again, it could be one unit, one family per unit. And then medical clinic. We have had a number of requests for clarification on birthing centers for town, and the way that our definitions are currently described, birthing center falls somewhere in between medical clinic and hospital, and the locations where those two uses are allowed are quite different. And so we are proposing to add birthing center to the list of uses that are described in our medical clinic use, so that because those are the way they operate are very similar, so that they can be regulated as medical clinics. For porch, we had kind of an odd definition that said porches were open to the sky, which we know many porches are not. So we have changed the definition of porch so that it is more in line with an architectural definition, which many of us would be used to when thinking of porches. And then the sixth is the supportive housing change that was put in by the Plan Commission. Clarification on number 2 in the supportive housing definition, so that it's clear that shelters that are intended for persons experiencing homelessness do not have to meet the requirements from supportive housing that require that staff person live on site with them, and that they be receiving medical, correctional, or other mandated supervision. That is the intent, though the intent of supportive housing is to include homeless shelters, they're explicitly listed. The general definition of supportive housing is too specific to actually describe the way that those facilities are typically run. So we've worked with the legal department and members of the community on this change to make those uses easier to do. And then we have 2 new definitions. One is firearm sales. Again, that used to be incorporated in the old code under a different use related to sporting goods that we no longer have. So we are adding that definition back into code as its own thing. And then small livestock is something you'll see discussed in a later petition as well. We do not currently have a definition. And so we are proposing later to see those regulated separately than medium or large livestock. And this defines what those are. So this was seen by 8 members of the Plan Commission, and they voted 8-0 to recommend approval. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Are there any questions? Councilmember Volan.
A brief one on the question about multifamily. If there is a building with a commercial unit below and a single unit above, does that literally count as multifamily?
We will regulate that as, that is the proposal, to regulate that as multifamily, because currently it's not, none of our definitions of dwellings right now incorporate that use, because we removed the use upper floor dwelling. And the way that previous use upper floor dwelling was regulated was similar to how multifamily is regulated. So that's why we're proposing to add that in here.
That's just fine. I just thought maybe that live work was sort of the intended definition of a single unit over a single commercial.
I think that's more a single unit that does both, where there, I think it can be either, but like the live works we saw at Alley Works on 6th Street are one unit connected on one floor with the work in front and live in back.
So that's literally the same unit.
Yes.
As opposed to 2 units.
Correct.
Got it. Thanks so much.
Other questions for Ms. Scanlon on Ordinance 2121? Okay, I had the same question as Councilmember Volin, so I appreciate him bringing that up. I now understand. All right, seeing no other questions, we will go to the public. If there's any member of the public who would like to comment on Ordinance 2121, which is revisions to the definitions part of our UDO, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom or use the chat function and send a chat message to the meeting host. Mr. Lucas, do we have anybody?
Yes, we have Alex Goodlad, who should be able to unmute.
Hello. I didn't completely catch on the PowerPoint the changes of definition involving involving like how homeless shelters are allowed, but it seems like the general intent of what it does is to make it easier for homeless shelters to exist. And if the interpretation is correct, this seems like a good change of definition individually, and I would encourage it. If it makes it harder, I would kind of discourage that. But yeah, that's all I've got. I yield.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
I don't see any other requests for comment at the moment.
All right, let's go back to council. Ms. Scanlon, could you briefly address the one public comment we had?
Sure, yes. So the intent of this change is to make them easier to do, to align the definition with the more realistic operation. And we worked, Plan Commissioner Cockrum worked with, I believe, members, I might say the wrong thing, New Hope for Families, and then also with Reverend Gilmore on that definition to try to make it in line with how those operations could work. So yes, it should be easier.
Thank you. Are there any other follow-up questions? All right, what about comments? Do any of my colleagues have comments on Ordinance 2121? All right, what about a motion?
Move to pass.
Second.
All right. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Rollo.
Yes.
Councilmember Scamilluri.
Yes.
Councilmember Boland.
Yes.
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
And I also vote yes. So that's a do pass recommendation of 9-0. And now we are ready for, what are we ready for, Ms. Scanlon?
We are ready for 2117 Chapter 3.
Thank you very much. I have to jump back and forth in my documents here.
Sure.
Ordinance 2117.
Okay. There we go. 2117 Chapter 3. These next three are kind of the more meatier ones that we'll see tonight. This has 30 proposed amendments. I believe 2 were added at the Plan Commission, but again, those were ones that staff was kind of working on and then worked with the Plan Commissioner to propose at the hearing. So these are all staff proposed and Plan Commission backed. There are a number of categories here. So I will just start at the top. Just a second. Oops. Sorry, grab my red line here. Okay. Okay, so some of these are clarifications. This one, for example, is a use special event that is in the code. It is a temporary use that is allowed by code. All of our other temporary uses have time limits and special event did not. So we are proposing to add the standard 15-day time limit to special event. The second is related to food protection fencing. We have food protection fencing, as you'll recall from the 2019-2020 update, detailed language in our landscaping, buffering, and fencing section. We would like to duplicate those exact regulations in the use specific standards for urban agriculture non-commercial, because we have found that just in the use of the code, often a member of the public will go to that use table and look at the use specific standards and not kind of be triggered to think to go look for it in fencing. So we would like to duplicate that there. The third clarification is that currently in code, as we just spoke about in the last ordinance, there is no definition for small livestock, but we will be adding that. So the current language related to existing structures used for livestock or livestock waste apply only to large or medium livestock, because again, that's all that code talks about. And so we would be proposing to clarify that the existing setbacks in code are for structures related to large or medium livestock. And I'll speak more about that here in a minute. And then the fourth is related to gas fuel dispenser units, whether or not one unit with a hose on each side counts as one, or whether each side of a unit should count as one. And so we are proposing that each side be counted as one. We just wanted that. That is how we do it functionally. When we use the code, we just want that to be clear in the code. There are limits on number of dispensers depending on where you're located, and so we needed that to be clarified. Number 5 is for storage unit buildings in 3 of our mixed-use districts, neighborhood, medium scale, and downtown. The way that the regulation is written, we wanted to clarify that you could have storage units, for example, on one floor and a different use on the other. Right now, the reason there are regulations about 2-story buildings is that we want those buildings to look like typical kind of office construction buildings, not just like storage units. So that's what the regulations are geared toward. But we think that they also inadvertently require that both floors be used for storage, and we don't think that's necessary. The third is that existing limits on accessory structures, we just want to add the word enclosed. Again, that's how we operate in practice and have for quite a number of years, that those size restrictions are on enclosed structures. So for example, you have a maximum square footage you're allowed to have in your backyard for a garage. And if you have a carport, then that doesn't count against you if it's open. Those are regulations we already use now, but we just wanted that to be clarified in the new table here. And then the 7th is that farm produce sales is a use listed in code. It says that you can operate for a maximum of 180 consecutive days. We would like to change that to 180 days within a calendar year. The purpose of the 180-day limit is to kind of capture that spring to fall selling season. And the way that it's currently written, you could operate part of the year, stop and then start again, and your clock restarts. We think that because the use is supposed to be accessory to permitted use on the lot, that the way the code is currently written would allow for a property to basically turn over into a farm produce sales location, because it doesn't really have that time limit if only small amounts of days are skipped at a time. So the second topic is student housing. There are 4 here. One is that we would like to require that the use specific standards for student housing apply in the mixed use student housing district that had previously been excluded. And then we are proposing that in the multifamily and mixed use districts, the separation requirements be changed slightly. So currently, if you're doing student housing, meeting the definition of student housing, then in these districts, then they have to be separated by at least 300 feet. We are adding in a provision so that it's clear that if you have more than one on a lot, those also have to be separated by 300 feet. And then because the regulation is basically written for student housing on adjoining lots, but we do have some large lots in town where more than one could be built, and we want the separation there as well. And there is also a provision put in related to use of the affordable housing incentives that was not previously included. We are also proposing to decrease the building floor plate based on district. So basically having them in the mixed use districts as well as the RM zoning and the RH zoning districts. Again, this is one where the regulation was new and we weren't quite sure how it was going to play out, and came to the sizes that we did with consultation with the consultant Clarion. Now that we've kind of seen them in action for a year, we do think that they're probably slightly bigger than necessary, and that reducing them is probably prudent at this time. We've also added in a stipulation that if incentives are used toward affordable housing, that then a larger floor plate could be used. Additionally, we added in a maximum floor plate of 20,000 feet for that used student housing in the student housing district, with the affordable housing incentive caveat as well. And then also reducing by 1 story from 4 to 3, the maximum height in the RH zoning district for that use. So here is an example of kind of what I was talking about. If this property goes to redevelop, it's just one large property. And so new buildings that would be built on this site under current regulations, there is no separation requirement. As a layperson going to this site, you would not know that they are or are not more than one property. Regulations now, if there were multiple properties here, they would have to be separated. Because it's one property, they don't. So we're trying to sync that regulation so that those on one property will still display that separation that's in code for separate properties. And then we have 2 more directly related to parking. The first is to add a 20-foot setback requirement for parking on the ground floor inside of a building facing a road for our multifamily uses. That is, something we've discussed in the downtown in the past, that interface between the pedestrian realm and the front of the building, and that if on the other side there is garage, oftentimes that hampers that ability and for the pedestrian to be able to kind of enjoy or interact with that building. And so we're proposing to set those areas back. And then the second is limiting ground floor parking to no more than 50% of a ground floor of a building adjacent to a public street for the student housing or dormitory use. Along the same lines, so that the direct interface between the inactive space and then the public realm is limited. And so that the entirety of the floor can't be used for parking, and that some sort of space that the residents can use and can be seen from the outside can be included on the first floor. And so back to the livestock discussion. We added setback requirements for structures containing small livestock, and they're slightly smaller than those that exist now, which I mentioned before would still be used for large and medium. So those would be 35 feet from the front property line, 15 from side and 25 from rear for smaller livestock, which could be utilized on some of our smaller urban lots. And number 2, we amended the table that exists in code related to how much space is required for livestock. And right now it is entirely dependent upon pasture size. But for some of the smaller livestock that we looked into, large pasture area wasn't necessarily required. Some of them were hand fed. And so we changed the minimum area needed for those to meeting minimum lot size for those areas. Adding small livestock, again, as I said, new use to the table and allowing 2 per lot, again, if they can meet the minimum lot size of the zone. And then the next one is a deletion of a note that was put in the last time when we did try to address the small livestock issue, but instead of just adding in the category small livestock, we tried to do it through a note that kind of exempted some size animals, but it didn't exactly make sense and actually ran afoul of the definition of medium livestock. So we're proposing to actually add definition small livestock and remove that note. And then the fifth is deleting a reference to the age of animal, which requires us to know the number of months of the animal and is potentially difficult for the petitioner to provide as well. And we don't think necessary with the new regulations put in. The next topic is accessory structures. The first change here is in the RM, RH, and RMH districts. We are adding a minimum square footage to the maximum footprint for accessory structures so that developments with only one or two small buildings can have typical accessory structure sizes. So right now, there is, it's percentage based. And if you have only a couple of small buildings, then you aren't really eligible for the kind of accessory structures that even a single family house may have. So we're adding in a minimum square footage comparable to our largest single family, which is 840 square feet. The number two is deleting the 50% maximum in the RE zoning district, as agricultural buildings are often larger than that, and we have those types of uses potentially in that district. This is again assuming that later that the following petition, if the following petition does not pass, then this will still remove that provision, and if it does, then this will be moved. It is removed in the other petition related to RE, excuse me. And then we have added a note in the R1 to exempt agricultural structures from the size limitations. Again, kind of anticipation of the RE-R1 combination, but also acknowledging that they could have structures in R1 as well. And then the last here is similar to the number one, which is in mixed use district, adding the minimum square footage to the maximum footprint for accessory structures. Again, before they were only percentage based. And so if you happen to only have a small main building, then your accessory structure was quite limited beyond kind of what would be a standard accessory size. Okay, now we're on to accessory dwelling units. We are proposing to remove currently you can only have an ADU if you meet the minimum lot size requirement for your zoning district. We are proposing to remove that. You'll recall that in 2019, 2020, we reduced the minimum lot sizes for our two main residential districts. Previously, RS became R2 and dropped by 1,200 feet. RC became R3 and dropped by 2,200 feet to 5,000. We have found when working with people who are requesting ADUs that as long as what they're proposing, obviously, of course, it still has to meet impervious surface coverage requirements and setback requirements, that they can still be done appropriately on lots that are smaller. And also that because we reduced the minimum lot size, we are kind of leaving out a smaller number of lots in each of those districts, and not really sure what the point of leaving them out is at this time, especially if the lots can still be protected by impervious surface coverage and setback requirements. So we're proposing to remove that minimum lot size requirement. The second is that we're proposing to clarify that in a detached ADU, the square footage that counts toward your ADU is that square footage that is in the ADU. So for example, if you had an ADU with a garage, the square footage of the garage isn't going to count against your maximum. That's what we do in practice, but we thought the language was a little unclear, so we're proposing to clarify that. And then proposing to have side and rear yard setbacks for the detached ADU be 5 feet, which is in line with the previous regulation. It got changed, we think inadvertently, in the 2019 update. And then the fourth is to remove the interested party notification requirements for the ADU. As we've said earlier, or as we've discussed before, ADUs used to be a conditional approval requirement, and now they do not require that if they can meet all of the standards of the ADU, which include size requirements, height, bulk, location requirements, that then they can be approved by right, by staff. And what was left in the 1920 update was that they are still required to send notice to 2 property owners deep on each side of their property, or to 300 feet, whichever is less. And what we have found on a couple of ADUs that we've done since is similar to the issue we've been discussing with the major site plan, is that sometimes when people receive that official letter, they think there's going to be a hearing or somewhere for them to discuss the ADU, when in reality, it's just a notice of letting them know that it's going to happen. That has created a little bit of confusion a couple of times. More importantly, we don't have other by right projects that don't go to commissions that require sending notice to your neighbors. So this kind of makes this a one-off. So we're proposing to remove that requirement. Additionally, we heard a lot of discussion about this at Plan Commission, and I'm sure we will hear it as well. You know, that neighbors are interested in hearing about something like this and some want to be notified, and whether or not it's appropriate for our city zoning code to require that someone who's building a use by right talk to their neighbors about it and get their input, or whether or not that should just kind of be happening because if they're already neighbors and they know each other, those types of things. So that is probably a discussion you'll hear quite a bit here. Again, we're proposing to remove because it's not, there are no other uses that we require that for. And we have found a couple of times at least it's created some confusion. And then also we do feel like it may deter some people who might otherwise seek out to build an ADU if they know they have to engage their neighbors and then not have a public hearing where those neighbors can be heard, where now it's just the property owner dealing with the neighbors and whether or not they're happy about the proposal that they're making, which again is allowed by code. Okay. So next we have, let's see, home occupation. This was one we have thought about for a while and are proposing to make a couple of changes to, kind of in light of how working has changed for people, people more working at home. So we are proposing to change the maximum interior space allowance from 15 to 50% inside of a house, that you could be running your business in a larger part of your home than you can now. Also, that use could happen in an accessory structure, as long as that accessory structure, meets accessory structure requirements, and clarifying that exempted uses are excluded from size limitations. So there are some uses, for example, if you're running a business entirely online, then you are exempt from home occupation standards. And then the second one would be adding, again, that home occupations can occur in accessory structure is new. Currently, they have to happen in the home. So allowing those to happen in accessory structures, which we do get a lot of requests for, would be a change, obviously change to code. And then finally, the last two are related to mixed use employment, which you will recall was discussed with the Bill C. Brown Fullerton rezone, that in mixed use employment, there may be room for some non-employment uses to support the primary employment uses in those areas. And so we, through the Plan Commission, propose to add the use retail medium scale as permitted, and also to increase the maximum square footage for a restaurant from 2,500 square feet to 5,000 square feet in the mixed use employment district. So the Plan Commission, obviously staff supports these amendments that we are bringing forward, and Plan Commission recommended approval as well, 9-0. I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ganlon. Are there any questions on this rather large ordinance 2117 and all the changes that are proposed to Chapter 3? Councilmember Sandberg.
Thank you. Not so much a question, but maybe a recommendation going forward when presentations are being made. I know those of us that have been through the comprehensive plan and the original UDO and now these revisions, we kind of know what the letters stand for, RM, RH, et cetera, ME, mixed use employment, but it might be helpful to the public who maybe are not as familiar with the lingo to kind of spell some of that out when we hear this again for a final vote. Just a suggestion. Thanks.
All right, are there any questions on the ordinance? Councilmember Flaherty.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Ms. Scanlon. Just by way of background for the question, I think as a lot of folks here know, we cannot pursue inclusionary zoning in Indiana by state preemption, which means mandating a certain percent of affordable units in a development. So instead, we use incentives, trying to create a system where we would increase the sustainability or number of affordable units provided within the development or a project rather, in exchange for something like being able to build higher, for instance. And almost by necessity, that's going to be an iterative process over time, trying to dial in those incentives to just the right level. For instance, I think the green building incentives that were part of the previous Unified Development Ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, were never utilized. So they were, whatever was being offered in exchange for the incentive was not enough to move any profit motivated project developer. Anyway, all that expository by way of asking about the student housing affordability, student housing floor plate changes and related changes to the student housing category. I assume the intent there is to try to create a system where it is more likely that we will see affordable units included as part of student housing developments that, or projects that qualify as student housing. Is that correct, Ms. Scanlon?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. We've seen a couple of projects, or Plan Commission will be seeing some large projects coming forward also that we think, yes, could benefit from that type of incentive being used. Of course, we want people to use our incentives, and that maybe the numbers we've included are too high for that to be a viable option.
Okay, were there any other motivations in particular? I mean, that struck me as probably the reason, given that the kind of former standards would apply in the case of meeting the affordability.
I think that we've also just seen in some of the designs that we've seen with the current sizes that they are quite large. And I mean, obviously we knew what size they were going to be, but to actually then see them played out on paper that maybe like, especially in the MN, that 2,500 really is still immediately adjacent to neighborhoods and those types of areas is probably more appropriate as the standard. And so that type of analysis, each level up, I think we think it's more prudent to bring them down.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Scanlon or the other staff members? I have a few. So on the topic of student housing, can you remind us what is the point of the separation requirement for student housing?
Sure. So I think the idea about the separation, and again, anyone can jump in if I'm wrong, is so that they won't be conglomerated. That one of the worries or whatever, especially in the non-student housing, non-mixed use student housing district, and that we've seen over time in complaints about developments that exist now, is that they're too conglomerated, too close together, and that it makes more sense to require some sort of separation so that they won't all be kind of built in a row and turn over areas that could otherwise support other types of housing or other types of commercial.
So just to encourage a variety of development?
Yes.
Okay. The other question I had on concerned the parking requirements. Oh, wait a minute. Actually, before I leave student housing, I wanted to ask about the sustainable building incentives. Councilmember Flaherty mentioned that, you know, with the decreased height and the decreased maximum floor plate of student housing, we'll probably see more developers trying to get the incentives for affordable housing. But what about sustainable development? Is that also in play here?
It is not written in currently, but I do think that that could be, that is also obviously a goal of the administration, and that could be added as well. I think because student housing, especially in this community, is particularly related to how we have in recent years kind of addressed some of our affordable housing issues, housing. I think that's why that was initially included as the only type of incentive that's included. Director Robinson can correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, I do think, again, the green incentives are also important for our goals. So I think those could be included as well.
So would that be an amendment?
I think that would then be an amendment to those, for example, building floor plate amendments, that then you would just add the reference for affordable housing as well. Or you could even just change the reference to be the incentives section as opposed to the affordable housing incentives section.
So currently it's those incentives are allowed in the student housing district, or are they not?
Oh, I believe so. Yes, I think so. Yes, I believe so.
So it's just a matter of referencing them.
I thought you were discussing the specific incentives that that indicate that you can have larger building floor plates if you do the incentives. Those in chapter 3, those only indicate the affordable housing incentives at this time.
Okay.
That reference.
All right. So I think I'll follow up on a possible amendment then.
Yep.
Are there other questions for staff on Ordinance 2117? Yes, Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. Ms. Scanlon, will you define for me somewhat or clarify affordable housing incentives for those projects? Will you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so in the code, we have an incentives section, just a second, and then that is split between affordable housing and sustainable development incentives. And then you have tiers, so requirements that are related to a percentage of your total gross floor area being dedicated to, and a number of dwelling units being dedicated, a percentage of dwelling units being dedicated to a certain target area, so less than 120% of HUD AMI or less than 80%. If you meet certain thresholds there, then there are incentives related to bulk requirements, so setbacks, and setbacks is the main one there. Minimum lot area if you're doing new lots, and then also height requirements. So if you meet certain incentives and you are over 6 dwelling units, then you can have you can have additional floors. There are some restrictions on that. For example, if you're in the neighborhood transition areas, some of those things won't apply to you. But in other parts of town, you are able to have additional stories, 1 to 2 stories, based on affordable housing incentives.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Ms. Scanlon on this particular ordinance? I have a question about parking and the restriction that only up to 50% of the ground floor can be used for parking. I know there was some discussion at the Plan Commission level about whether this might just make it very difficult as far as engineering to have more than one level of parking if you can only use 50% of the floor plate, because if you have more than one level, you have to put in a ramp and get from one level to the next. Can you speak a little bit about, the feasibility of still having interior parking on buildings that are smaller?
Yeah. So we have some buildings, of course, that have parking on one floor that don't require parking on more than one floor and have lots of units. Or different scale size of units. So it is a good question. We're still kind of looking into it to get you some examples on a small scale example. For example, like in a in an MN zoning district. The building on South Washington, the Fox building on South Washington, that houses Two Sticks Bakery. That's a very small building. It has 9 one unit apartments in it, and they have 50% of their ground floor is parking, and it's 3 spaces, I think, in there. So I think a smaller scale project, a very small scale project like that, that it could work. We have other projects such as the Cityside project at 3rd and Washington, a lot more units than the Washington. It is larger, of course, but they have 2 levels of parking, but it's not interior access. So they access the basement from Washington and the first floor from the alley. So the first floor, it does meet our 50% requirement because they built by right under the old code. And they operate obviously with more parking than 1 level, but did it in a different way where they were able to have more than 1 access. Meaning we do think that it's possible that buildings of these different size scales can be built and still meet the requirement. Is that the most common? And is that, no, it's not, but that it is possible, and that we are still looking into the structured parking question. Hopefully talking to an architect here shortly, again, to kind of go over that. How much, is there basically a minimum square footage you need to be able to have a ramp up to the 2nd floor, so that we can hopefully give you that information next week. So we do think it's possible that development can occur. We have seen that, properties that meet this requirement, but not necessarily that have the structured parking with the access interior to the building.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking to get you more, we knew that you had that type of question, so we're looking to get you more questions on that.
More answers, I hope.
Thank you. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go to the public? All right, seeing none, we'll go to the public. If any member of the public would like to comment on Ordinance 2117, which includes changes to Chapter 3, the use regulations, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can send a message via chat to the meeting host. Mr. Lucas, who do we have?
First up, I believe we've got Peter Dorfman, who should now be able to unmute.
Hi, Peter Dorfman. This was a big, long, complicated amendment. There were parts of it that used to be more relevant to me. I used to be a farmer, but now I'm not. So I kind of went right by those sections of the amendment, but I am a very strong proponent of ADUs. And I'm glad that they're by right. And I think that a lot of the things that people want or say they want from duplexes can be accomplished under current law with ADUs. So from that perspective, I want to strongly support one of the things that I heard in this amendment and strongly oppose one of the other things that I heard in this amendment. I heard during the Plan Commission hearings that there was once or has been a restriction on the use of ADUs to do business. I think that was very surprising. I think it's crazy. We should be able to allow people to do business in their ADUs. And so I strongly support that. However, we had an earlier discussion, largely between council members Rallo and Volan, about the need to create the opportunity for neighbors to talk to each other when there's a new project, even if it's a by right project. I'm strongly opposed to the removal of the notification process. And I know that was discussed during the Plan Commission hearings, and the point was made that we don't currently require that for a single family house going in on a vacant lot. But an ADU is a separate structure. Many of them are built over garages. They're tall. They can be up to 25 feet tall. It is easily possible that they will block somebody's sunlight, and they change the skyline for neighbors. And I believe that neighbors are entitled to know when an ADU is coming. And we may have differences over whether that should be required, I strongly believe that it should be. And I would be strongly opposed to removing the notification requirement with ADUs, particularly detached ADUs. But even for an attached ADU, you're going to be increasing the number of people who occupy a lot. And I think neighbors are entitled to know that. So please don't remove that requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Yes.
Mr. Lucas?
John Lawrence.
Hi, actually, it's Jan Sorby here on John's computer. And I did also have a comment on removing notification of the ADUs. But my concern is really for people who are living in a covenant area. I'm worried that I know the city and the county does not tell people if they come for a permit to build, if they live in a neighborhood that has a covenant that prohibits an ADU. And I too am in favor of the ADUs. And I worry that a neighbor, if they did not know, would very innocently start building an ADU. And down the line, another neighbor would come in and say, hey, you know, those are not allowed in our neighborhood. And I'm afraid that if the notification is not done, that there could be some very litigious situations set up where one neighbor would then have to sue, or the association would sue the person who is building. And that person who's building, they might have some money into that. So I'm afraid that there could be really, I don't know, some bad water under the bridge, so to speak, if that notification goes away. It doesn't give neighbors the advantage of being aware of if it's allowed within a covenanted neighborhood. So that's it. I just worry about those things. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Other public comment, Mr. Lucas?
Yes, I do have a comment that came in over chat that I would like to read. This comment is from David Wolf Bender with the IDS. Mr. Bender says, Mr. Bender would like to know how the building floor plate is defined. Is the idea that under this ordinance, each floor can be a maximum of 2,500 feet unless it is under the affordable housing incentive, where it could be up to 5,000 square feet per floor, and the maximum floor number would be 3 stories, correct? Mr. Bender says he knows the council doesn't have to answer, but would appreciate the clarification if possible. And I see another hand raised. Elizabeth Gallman should be able to unmute.
Okay. I am going to support the previous individuals who requested that the notification requirement not be eliminated. I think it's very important that all the neighbors get to know what's going on. They all get notified. They all get a chance to speak to each other and with each other about this requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Mr. Lucas?
Sturbaum, I believe, would like to speak and should now be able to do so.
Yes, I've supported ADUs in the last 2 comprehensive plans, and I think it's the best way to have gentle density come in and support home ownership. I understand the non-notification since it's being by right, and I've always respected the conditional use as a way to work through issues and make a better project, but I understand the non-notification, but it sort of rings an anti-democratic bias bell that the consultants had, that, you know, neoliberal anti-exclusionary zoning movement as a whole has, that, and that we've seen expressed when the populace speaks out in 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1 against, but it's really anti-democratic to ignore the public. So the non-notification just feels like another leftover of this we know best, let the market decide, don't let the populace get involved. So I'm not sure I'm against non-notification when you're going to tell people you can't do anything about this, but it's an attitude that pervades this entire movement, that we don't care what the public thinks because this is too important. But that is anti-democratic at its core, and it causes more problems than it solves. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next up is Cynthia Bretheim, I believe, who should be able to unmute.
Thank you. This is Cynthia Bretheim. I agree. I think the more neighbors talk, the better. The more developers talk with neighbors, the better. Even if you override us, it's still a good idea to keep people talking. It's a good democratic offering, and it is a little bit of a pain but it makes for neighborhoods, it makes for communities, and it makes for a finished product where people can have some buy-in, or at least think that someone's listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Margaret Clements, who should be ready to comment.
Hi again. Thank you for hearing me. My name is Margaret Clements, and I'm also a member of the Small Business Administration's National Leadership Council, and I study entrepreneurship. And one thing that I didn't fully understand in your presentation is the changes that you're making to medium and large livestock, and the requirements and how difficult it might be for the changes for the local business owner. I mean, if you're a bison farmer, Indiana's kind of an exciting place to be right now. And I hope that you've involved the medium and large livestock farmers in the changes that you're proposing, and that you're not hindering their business opportunities just as they're getting off the ground. That's all. I hope you're talking to them just like you should be talking to neighbors and talking to the community. And I hope you're not making things worse, but hoping to you're making things better. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other public comment?
Not that I see, no.
All right, we'll come back to the council. Are there any follow-up questions? Councilmember Rollo?
Well, I had a comment actually.
Okay, let's go to questions first, and then I'll come back to you. Are there any follow-up questions? I have one. Ms. Scanlon, the height of an ADU is limited to the same height as a new single-family home, right?
Well, it's smaller. Yes, it's quite a bit smaller than a new single-family home can be in at least 10 feet in all districts. So yeah,
Okay.
ADU has a height limit. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. He said 25. It might be. That seems correct. Hold on just a second. Here we go. Excuse me. Yeah, 25 feet in height, and your maximum height in the R3, for example, is 35 feet.
All right, thank you very much. Oh, Mr. Roebling, you have something to add?
Yeah, Ryan Roebling, zoning planner. I just want to address that and also make sure that attached ADUs are permitted to be the same height as the primary structure.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. All right, any other follow-up questions? Councilmember Volan.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that someone answer the question that Mr. Bender asked about the floor plate. I've already kind of forgotten the detail of it, but I was interested in that answer too. the affordable housing and the effect of it on floor plate. Ms. Scanlon, do you remember that question?
Well, I started to write it down and I didn't get it all down.
I'm happy to reread the question.
Yes, will you please, Stephen? Thank you.
If you would, Mr. Lucas, thank you.
Mr. Bender was asking how the building floor plate is defined. Is the idea that under this ordinance, each floor can be a maximum of 2,500 feet unless it's under the affordable housing incentive, where it could then be up to 5,000 square feet per floor. And the maximum floor number would be 3 stories, correct?
So yeah, as it goes to definition, and I'm curious, does he have
So
it? Does he
building
understand it
floor plate,
correctly?
Yeah, is the 2,500 feet is the area that your building is covering on the lot. And the 2,500 and 5,000 he's referencing is for the MN zoning district. So they're different based on district. And you can see that in the red line. The other mixed use districts are larger. Yes, if you use the affordable housing incentives, that's how you get the larger number. And number of stories is different, again, based on which district you're in. And also if you're using incentives to gain height.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, any other follow-up questions? Councilmember Flaherty?
Sure, thank you. Ms. Scanlon, I think it was mentioned by a member of the public that if a new single family home was being built on a vacant lot, there's no notification of neighbors of any kind. Is that right? What about an addition to an existing single family home?
No notification required. So no notification required for anything you're doing on a traditionally single family lot, except for ADUs.
Okay, thanks.
All right, any final follow-up questions before we go to comments? All right, let's go to council comments, and I believe Councilmember Rollo had one.
Yes, thanks. Just to say that with Councilmember Flaherty's point well taken, I think the ADU concept is relatively new, and I think that the notification idea is not a bad idea. I think that the advantages may well outweigh any downside. So I'm thinking of bringing an amendment to this to retain interested party notification, just in the interest of it leading to better outcomes.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yeah, just a short comment on the same issue. I think I appreciate the comments on the subject, and I can see the appeal really in either way. I think when things go well, like there's definitely a vision that can be created for things going well in that context of having that additional notification requirement for ADUs, even though they're a permitted use. But I think I've just kind of seen too much in the literature from the AARP and other urban planners about downsides that accessory dwelling units are often rented for far below market rate, sometimes for no money at all, often to family members who may have particular special needs or maybe in a sensitive care situation and other sort of private concerns that perhaps shouldn't be aired in a public meeting. I think people have their reasons sometimes for wanting to add that type of housing and not kind of have a public discussion about it. So that's one concern. I think there's also a concern that there could be some effect of discouraging accessory dwelling units, which I think pretty strongly as a community, over the last number of years, we've come to accept as a desirable use for neighborhoods among most folks. So it's something I wouldn't want to discourage. And finally, I guess, important to me is that we kind of treat the permitted uses that we say you're allowed to have in equal ways. So if we had a notification requirement for building a new single family home, or we had a notification requirement for building an addition on your home, I might feel differently as well. But I think on balance, I see too much downside risk and sort of differential treatment of the ADU concept when I think it really should be uniform across the board. So for that reason, I support that shift in this proposed ordinance. Thanks.
Additional council comment? Okay, well, I'll just briefly say that I am going to pass just because of the parking issue that I'll be working with staff on to get a better understanding whether it's a little bit too restrictive in the case of smaller buildings to allow only 50% of the ground floor to be parking. As far as the ADUs, I don't see any reason to keep the notification requirement. You don't have to notify your neighbor if you're doing an addition to your house, if you're building a new single family house, if you're doing all kinds of things. So I don't know why it would be necessary for an ADU. So that's all I have. I'm ready for a motion, please.
Move to pass.
Second.
All right. Councilmember Sandberg.
Pass.
Councilmember Volin.
Pass.
Councilmember Sims.
Pass.
Councilmember Scarlett.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Councilmember Councilmember Rollo.
I thought I voted yes. Sorry.
That was a yes.
Council, you called on Councilmember Volin before, but
Sorry.
Councilmember Lalo answered.
Oh.
I meant to say pass.
Okay.
I'm hearing an echo.
Yes.
Is it my turn?
So Councilmember Rollo was a pass, which I did record. I thought it was Councilmember Volin. Councilmember Volin, what is your vote?
I vote yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Pass.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
And I will vote pass. So the result is a vote of 4-0-5. And I would like to take a 5-minute break at this time and see you all back here. Let's see, it's 8:18, so at 8:23. So let's just take a short break. Thank you. All right, we have a quorum. Let us restart this committee of the whole. And we have now gotten to Ordinance 2118, which is about Chapter 4, Development Standards. Ms. Scanlon, please tell us about this one.
Okay, great, thank you. We're on to Ordinance 2118, which covers Chapter 4, Development Standards and Incentives. There are 6 categories with 27 proposed amendments. And I will briefly go through those. The first group is another clarification group. We have a number of different compliance thresholds for our development standards based upon whether or not you're doing entirely new build or a remodel of an existing site, if it's conforming or non-conforming. There are different sections for those. So the first one is just related to a table that applies to conforming sites and structures only. We want to just add in the title conforming sites and structures so that it's clear what that is related to. For the second one, there is a provision in code that allows for existing encroaching setbacks for additions. This provision has always been limited to primary structures and was written, that was what the intent was for and how we use it. And so we are just proposing to clarify that language here because the language feels a little unclear and that it may also apply to accessory structure in those structures in those districts. And that has not been the case in the past. Number 3, because we are proposing to change the definition of porch, the previous definition, which more accurately really often describes kind of like a deck or a concrete slab, has allowable encroachments into like a side yard setback, for example. And we are proposing to remove that so that because we're changing the way porch is described, enclosed structures, structures with roofs are not typically allowed in this encroachment section. So that will be removed. We are adding a disturbance section to the Karst Conservancy easement portion of the code to make it clear what areas where the areas where no disturbance is allowed, which is the entire easement area. The other environmental standards have a particular disturbance section and this one does not. And so we are mirroring that language here just for clarity. In the flood hazard reduction section, we are removing the term on platted lots so that it will be clear that the regulations apply to all lots and not just those in platted areas. There is a provision that requires vehicular access in some zoning districts, in the zoning district of R3 for single family. If you have alleys that are adjacent, then doing a new development, then you're required to utilize the alleys. We are proposing to add that provision to R4 as well. And then we are proposing to add RM and RH parking standards for single family, plex, mobile home, and manufactured home lots so that those kind of smaller uses in the more intense districts will be held to the same standards as they would if they were in a traditionally single family district. Number 8 is, oh wait, these might not be numbered the same, sorry. There we go. Number 8 is, as has been the case for a long time, you are allowed to use crushed stone with a raised border, allowable as your driveway on single family driveways. But that language got changed a little bit in the switch over to the new code. And so we are adding that in to clarify that that is still an allowable use of crushed stone. And then for number 9, duplicating transition standards, setback standards to be not only in the neighborhood transition standards section, but also here at table 4.5, if this is where you were to go to look first. Another kind of just cross-reference that we think is important. And then adding the R4 to affordable housing incentives where the R1 through R3 already exist. And this is not for height housing, this is for the affordable housing incentives related to setbacks and new lot sizes. The second group is transportation terminology. As I mentioned before, they changed the names of how roads are classified in the new transportation plan we did. And the previously called neighborhood roads have been changed to the more commonly used term local road. And so that was done after the writing of the UDO. And so we are proposing to change 4 references of neighborhood street to local street. 4 here in parking. 1 is for one use in the code, we're proposing to increase the maximum allowable parking from 3.3 to 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. This is for the use medical clinic. We have seen a number of variances and or people calling in with questions about potential and existing medical clinics over the last, I would say, 5 or so years, maybe longer. Where in some cases they have been able to demonstrate that that particular type of use does generate more need for parking than some other similar uses. 3.3 is pretty standard for many commercial uses. And so we are proposing to increase that to 5 to allow for kind of appointment overlap and things like that that we often see in the medical clinics, which they have shown sometimes necessitates extra parking, especially because a lot of our roads in town don't have on-street parking, which further limits their ability to locate. And then let's see, we're adding a longer parking area for alley access for multifamily zone parcels so that they, for the recognition that multifamily units may have more on-site parking need. So making the actual driveway portion on multifamily zone parcel to be slightly deeper. And then the third here is adding a provision to make sure that a driveway, if your driveway is deriving access to your site from an alley, but you live on a corner lot, that your driveway access off the alley needs to be at least 15 feet from the public street, so that there's not your driveway, you know, immediately adjacent to the public road and parallel, which could cause some safety concerns. And then we added a motorcycle parking space standard, as that has come up a number of times in the past few years. And so having the availability of designating some spaces for that use. There is one related to access. This is one we may be working on before the next time you see it. It's a little wordy or maybe convoluted the way that it's written, but the purpose of the amendment is to allow drive-through lanes and driveways to be even with the front of a building rather than 20 feet behind the front building wall. So the current parking provision is that parking spaces, including drives and drive-throughs, have to be 20 feet behind the front building wall. So that amounts to slightly over 2 parking spaces length, or I mean, the width of 2 parking spaces is how far back you have to be. We have seen appropriate development where drive-throughs are allowed to be even with the front building wall. We've seen that there's a Chick-fil-A on East 3rd. We have a couple of other locations, I believe, as well. And that is something that we have seen that we think could be appropriate. Again, the language, we might need to work on that a little bit. It's kind of confusing. And then a few related to architecture. There were no architectural standards listed for mixed-use student housing, so we added in our general mixed-use standards for that district. We added metal as a secondary material option in the mixed-use district, something we have seen before and is fairly common. Again, secondary material is 20% or less, so not large metal buildings, but metal accents. And then we added anti-monotony standards to our mixed-use districts that did not have those. A few related to landscaping. We have an issue sometimes when a public pedestrian facility is required for a project and there is not room in the right-of-way. We then work with the property owner to have the sidewalk on their property and an easement to the public put over the sidewalk so that the public can use it as a regular public sidewalk. We are proposing to add into the code that in situations like that, where there is no option for sidewalk in the right of way, that the property owner would not be dinged, that the sidewalk that they are putting in as a public benefit would not count against them for their impervious surface maximums. And so we are proposing to include that here. The second is a clarification from the old code that mulch and decorative stone can only be used around plantings, not to fill beds or areas between buildings, those types of things, where areas that we are expecting for those areas to be green. We think this code isn't quite as clear as the previous one, so we're asking to clarify that. And then the third is to remove an existing requirement that 50% of required shrubs be evergreen. That is a carryover from the old code. Now that we require natives, there are far less options, and our senior environmental planner has run into many times having to work with a petitioner to do some species, to allow some, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but to allow other plantings. We allow substitutions of different types of plants, but we do want shrubs. And so we are proposing to remove the 50% requirement. The evergreens that are possible would still be on the list, but it is not possible to meet the 50% requirement as well as the diversity requirement with the number of evergreen shrubs that are native to this area. And finally, for signage, we are proposing that all second-story uses be treated equally. The way that it's written in the code right now, non-retail tenants is particularly called out, and so we are just now referencing whether you're on the second story or not, irrespective of use. And then the second is to make it possible for a multi-tenant center sign. Right now, they must be a wall sign, and allowing for those to be projecting and they would also have to meet all of our projecting sign size limitation requirements, but just allowing a multi-tenant center sign to be projecting as well. That's all I have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scanlon. Are there questions about Ordinance 2118 from council members? Councilmember Boland.
Yes. Is there an echo? I'm hearing an echo. Test 1, 2. Okay, it's gone now. Okay, I've got a couple questions. First of all, Ms. Scanlon, can you give me some sense of how you came to the decision about the medical clinic parking? Did you have specific concerns from medical clinics? Like, who raised this concern?
Yeah, and then Mr. Grulich may be able to give a little bit more backstory as well. But I know in one in particular that we've done in recent years, an endodontist on, I don't know if endodontist is the right term, sorry. So, they do oral surgeries on College Mall. Because there's no street parking there and no adjacent opportunities for parking. And because of the way their scheduling works with people having to stay longer after their surgeries are done to, like, I think medicine wearing off, that type of thing, they have a lot of overlap where the number of patients they're seeing is smaller than the actual number of people who are kind of in the building. And they were able to demonstrate based on their existing facility that they do regularly need more space than is allowed by code, and they received a variance. I think they received a variance at that time. This was a number of years ago. We've seen other similar uses make a similar argument when looking for locations and discussing parking options, and they're all, we have seen that under medical clinic a number of times, and that's why we're bringing forward the change. And Mr. Grulich can add anything if I've left anything out there.
Yeah, there were two other situations. One was the Med Express on West 3rd Street out by 69. And then also another dentist office on North Walnut Street. And as Mrs. Scanlon pointed out, one of the problem with these locations is a lack of any on-street parking. So both of these locations, they've done parking studies based on other facilities, kind of showing their parking need. One of the other unique situations here is, the standard that they are being held to, the 3 per 1,000, is the same parking standard that you would find for a business office, which really just takes into account the employees that are there and doesn't provide any parking for the actual customers. So as Mrs. Scanlon also pointed out, you've got overlap with appointments. So, the 3 per 100 was barely meeting their requirement just of the folks that work there and didn't really take into account the clients that were visiting that. So the 5 per 1,000 was based on those situations and studies that they had done.
Well, you could characterize it as parking need, but I would call it parking demand. There was simply a demand between the employees and the customers for this unusual use. But I mean, did we find out at all what effort they had made to cut down on their demand for parking?
No, we did not go into, specifics of their business model of, how they could reduce their parking demand. It was simply a need based on their locations and the way that business is run and the way it operates.
Okay, again, I question the use of the word need. It's all demand. But let's go to the other question I had, which was the allowing drive-through lanes, the Chick-fil-A as the example. How did the Chick-fil-A get its, if I think I'm understanding the description. I know this is the one, Ms. Scanlon, that you said you had trouble describing. So when you say 20 feet behind the front building wall, does that mean that the drive-through, the outer edge of the drive-through that's closest to the street can't be more than 20 feet from the front building wall, which is closest to the street?
Correct. So it's like the right-of-way line, and then 15 feet back, your building starts, and then 20 feet behind that, your parking starts. And if you need a drive-through, that's as close as it can be as well.
But aren't they coming off of the street to get to the drive-through? So doesn't that mean the drive-through actually connects to the street?
What we've seen in this, at Chick-fil-A, for example, they come from around, and the other locations we've looked
From
at,
around.
they come from the other side of the building and then do the drive. So for example, come from the east side of the building, but the drive-through's on the west side of the building.
Okay.
So the two situations that have been most recent, one is that Chick-fil-A that Mrs. Scanlon just mentioned over at the mall. The other is the Panera that is just to the west of that.
So the Chick-fil-A received a variance in order, because it was a corner lot, we found that there was difficulty with meeting that setback. With the Panera site plan, that was approved with the PUD site plan for the mall. So we didn't have to make findings for the variance, but the Planning Commission allowed that arrangement with the drive-through lane being even with the front of the building.
Okay, so in other words, this would permit that kind of drive-through use.
Yeah, so, some of the difficulties that were found was, the 20-foot setback, it really made the drive-through window be further back on the site. But, the main intent of this section of the code was to not have drive-through lanes between the building and the street. So, whether it's even with the building or 20 feet back, you still accomplish that intent. We're not getting drive-through lanes that are separating a building and the street. So we were just taking into account several situations where we had seen extreme difficulty meeting that. So we were just trying to reconcile the code with that.
So I see where you're going here. I guess my question is, are you not concerned at all with the prioritization of a drive-through as an effective frontage of a business? In other words, doesn't this sort of encourage, the lack of building facade because it's in the name of a drive-through?
No, we don't feel that it really changes the look of the building or the site. You can certainly argue that requiring the drive-through lane to be 20 feet back does create more green space, but it doesn't really change how the building interacts with the street or pedestrian accessibility to the building. Having the drive-through lane be even still gives you a building kind of forward facade along a street frontage. So, that was our idea coming forward with amending this section.
No, I get that.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just trying to sorry, Ms. Scanlon, go ahead.
Sorry. So the building interface is still the same, allowing the drive-through to move forward while it moves basically where that green space would be, right? That's it within that 20 feet. Because if you push it back, in some cases, what you basically end up needing more width for that, you're kind of smushing that drive-through lane that they need. And so they would be redesigning, the parking and the drive-through further back on the lot, but then they would just be using up space that they would otherwise, maybe not be able to use because of their maximum cap for parking, their maximum impervious surface space, their minimum landscaping. They would just be using it in a different location. And what we've seen with the two that we've done and others that we've talked to is that you can still get that good, what we think pedestrian interface, because it's not going in front of the building. The building is still moved forward, but then the drive-through is kind of more viable and able to be located on the lot in a way that's not obtrusive to a pedestrian accessing the building, but isn't kind of restrictive to the parking on the back.
Okay, thank you both.
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions for staff on Ordinance 2118? I have some questions. I was wondering, and I think Ms. Scanlon may have stepped away, but Mr. Roebling and others are here. I wonder if somebody could please clarify the use of affordable housing incentives and the sustainability incentives in the R districts, the residential districts. In what way is their use limited or accepted? And are there height limits even with using those incentives?
Yep, certainly. I'll try to address some of that with you. So the affordable housing incentives do allow for reduced bulk standards, so reduced setbacks, reduced lot sizes, reduced lot width for the R districts. However, that was not included with the R4 district. We don't believe that was intentional. It was just an oversight. So we were proposing to add the R4 district as a prospective zoning district that would be able to utilize the affordable housing or sustainable development incentives.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm wondering, since it is in a residential area and there are other rules about height and neighborhood transitions and things like that, in those residential zones. I wonder how do those work together?
So they would still have to meet the height standards. They would still have to meet the transition zone standards. So the affordable housing doesn't offer, as I recall, any relief from that or reduction. Those would still be applicable. It's just the setbacks and lot width and lot size.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. Sorry, I did leave, but I do know the answer to this question kind of. So
okay.
I think what you're asking, we've talked about this a little bit via email. There was some concern from the neighbors about if you are using the incentives in or next to the R districts, couldn't you be creating buildings that are quite out of scale from the neighboring buildings? So, so correct me if I'm going down the wrong path, that's fine. The building heights, and this came up earlier tonight from a comment from the public, those building heights are restricted by your relationship to the R districts. So currently RE through R4. And you cannot gain access to the additional incentives, the additional height incentives within 100 feet of one of those districts. Let's see, I believe you can over 100 feet, but obviously most of our lots that are adjacent to our R districts are not going to be wide enough that you could be 100 feet away from the R zone and then still have room to build a building and have your setback requirements met on the other side. Of course, there will be exceptions, but I'm thinking of areas around the historic neighborhoods, which I know was a question and of some concern. So the incentives, as Eric mentioned, related to setbacks and lot size and those types of things, especially in new development, are available for the R districts. There are for the affordable housing incentive, excuse me, and then for those districts minus the R4 currently in the way that the code is written right now, the sustainable development incentives are also applicable for uses in those districts as well, including single family and potential plexes. Hold on, I wanted to make one more comment, but I lost my page here. Just a second. And so what I wanted to say. Oh, yes. So then it clarifies again in the sustainable development incentives that singles and plexes that are utilizing the sustainable development are not, again, eligible for height incentives. So there are stopgaps in the code that even if you are using the incentives, which is great, and we want you to, you can get some bulk allowances, but you aren't going to get height except for in very limited situations where you're more than 100 feet from a residential district. Did that answer your question?
Yes,
Sorry.
it does.
Okay,
thank you very much. Are there any other questions from council members? Councilmember Rollo.
Just wondering if the removal of the 50% requirement for evergreen shrubs, does that mean there are no requirements at all then?
No requirements for them to be evergreen, yes.
Okay, so we could
change. When we did discuss that.
We could have no evergreens.
Correct, and we discussed a lower number, and I could get you some more information from Senior Environmental Planner Thompson. We talked about, changing it to 10 or trying to match it with kind of the number that are available, lowering it. But I think we are proposing none because on smaller sites, that could end up being 1 or 2. And she kind of thought maybe the benefit of what the intent of the original, inclusion isn't going to be met that way either.
Okay, thank you.
That makes sense.
All right, I have another question, and I had emailed Ms. Scanlon about this. The language for the change about separation of drives from intersections is really obtuse to me. I don't understand it. Can you please explain it to me?
Sure. Do you mean what you had sent me was the one about the 45 degrees
yes.
closer to a street than that is I believe, Eric, that is the one that's related to the drive-throughs, correct?
Yes, it sounds like it. So I can try to explain it, but honestly, it's one of those that works better with a visual representation. I don't know if there's really any way for me to do that. You know, so the way that the code says is that drives are prohibited in the front parking setback running less than 45 degrees parallel to the street. So what you have to imagine is, imagine a street, imagine a frontage there, and then draw a 45 degree from where your drive angle is. So in that space, in that 45 degrees from that line to the street, you are not allowed to have a drive lane in that area. So it has to be greater than 45 degrees. So it prevents a drive from coming into a site, making an immediate right turn, for instance, and then circling around a building. So this is the language that prevents a drive-through lane from occurring between a building and a street. So it allows for a drive to come in, you know, maybe perhaps slightly wander, you know, to the right or left, a very small amount, but it does not allow you to come in and then, you know, circle around a building between that and the street. So I'm trying to describe it as best I can verbally.
Okay.
It works a lot better with pictures.
Okay, can you provide pictures next week, please?
Yes, we can do that, or certainly try to email folks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. All right, any other questions before we go to the public? All right, seeing none, we'll go to members of the public. If anybody has a question a comment on Ordinance 2118, which is the revisions to Chapter 4 Development Standards, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can type a message to the meeting host using the chat function. And Mr. Stephen Lucas is our meeting host. I don't see any hands. Do you, Mr. Lucas?
I do not, and I don't believe I have any messages in the chat. Just double check. I do see a hand raised now from Jean Lennon, who should now be able to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Jean Lennon. I just wanted to say to the whole council that I've been trying to learn and understand how the incentives work with the R4 district to get a real good picture of what types of structures could be built. I also have not, I've asked, it was a while back, but I will keep asking about what could happen if lots are combined and how that might affect what could be built within an R4. So I guess I don't have all those answers yet, and I'm not sure if you all do. And so I would encourage you to try to understand that before the voting next week or whenever that is. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other member of the public here to comment? Mr. Lucas, do you see any messages?
No, I don't see any additional requests for comment.
All right, we'll come back to council members. Are there any follow-up questions, first of all? All right, any comments, council comments on Ordinance 2118? All right, I would entertain a motion.
Move to pass on Ordinance 2118.
Second.
All right, Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Scambaluri.
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Councilmember Volan.
No.
Councilmember Sims.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Rallo.
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. So that is a vote of 8-1. And we will move on to, I believe it's our final agenda item for the evening. Ordinance 21-22, removal of residential estate zoning and corresponding amendments to the R1 zoning. And which staff member is going to present this?
That would be me, Ryan Roebling.
Yes, please, Mr. Roebling, go ahead.
All right, thank you. All right, so this is the petition that will effectively combine the RE and R1 zoning districts. It'll remove the RE district from the code and the map and amend the R1 uses to incorporate a few of the uses that were allowed in the RE district, but not in the R1, RE residential estate, R1 residential large lot. So this will allow for the continued availability of the architectural uses in the RE, which was designed to allow for a mixture of residential and agricultural uses, including crops and pasturage, which is the primary focus, and then also urban agriculture. This will allow for that continued agricultural use to be transferred to the R1 district while enabling smaller developments that would be allowed by the R1 district, as the RE district is currently 2.5 acres minimum lot area. The R1 district's roughly 1/2 acre. So quite a bit smaller. But one aspect of the RE district was created in part to provide protection for environmentally sensitive areas by limiting subdivision to that 2.5 acre minimum lot size. Switching the minimum lot size to the R1 standard allows for additional development while also providing existing environmental protections in code to protect those sensitive areas that require that further preservation. So there are currently 23 parcels, 4 areas roughly, that are RE that will become R1 if this is adopted. And let's see, hang on. I can't scroll for some reason. There we go. So this is the proposed allowed use table as it was amended by Plan Commission. It'll move over all of the agricultural uses that were previously R1 allowed as accessory. They will move them to conditional or permitted as they are proposed, or as they are in RE. And then this was adopted by Plan Commission 9-0, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roebling. Can you show us the map again? Sorry, it kind of went by a little fast for me.
There you go, sorry.
Can it be any larger?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, so off of North Dunn and then.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to get the rest of this stuff out. So I will note that this does show an existing PUD that is proposed to be R1 in the future. It's attached to another currently RE district. It's down here. So.
Can you just briefly review, just verbally, where those 4 groups are?
Yes,
I mean, I know I can recognize North Dunn. I can't really recognize the others.
There's North Dunn. There's Tap, West Tap here, down here. That was the Duncan Campbell that you recently saw.
Oh yeah.
There's, I think, East 10th, and then I never remember what's down there. So hang on one second.
So the East 10th is the Daisy Garden Farm project property.
Okay.
And then I don't know what the.
And then the one on the southeast side, that is a remnant from the Canada Farm PUD. So it's just a large piece of ground that is just, it's part of the Canada Farm PUD, but it wasn't approved for any real uses. It's got a large accessory structure on there and a ball field right now. So we're proposing to, well, it was going to be RE, but will be R1.
Okay, so there aren't any houses on there right now?
No, not for the one on the Canada Farm PUD. There is one just to the west of it, but not on that actual property.
That's in my district, so I would be surprised if there were houses that I didn't know about. All right, thank you so much. Are there questions for staff on Ordinance 2122? Well, I have one. Since RE was one of the areas that urban agriculture was potentially a use in and will still be a use allowed once they change to R1, I'm wondering about fencing options, if there's sufficient options in the R1 for fencing if people are growing crops or have livestock. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. Yeah. The since they will be combined, essentially, it'll take the R1 or excuse me, the RE rules for fencing, which allow for taller fences for the protection of agriculture. There's also the in the fence standards currently, there is a rule that allows for up to 12-foot fence. So you have two rules that allow for taller fences for the protection of agriculture in the now or would be now R1 district.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions on Ordinance 2122? Yes, Councilmember Smith.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. Mr. Roebling or anyone that wants to comment, what practical effect does this have? What does this mean to me or to the general public when this change happens?
Sure. So the big one is it'll reduce the minimum lot size from the 2.5 acres to roughly half an acre. It'll also have, if you recall, the Duncan Campbell rezone from ME or EM, excuse me, to RE. He had to get several variances. So this would fix one of those issues that we couldn't find a reason to have. The rear yard setback was 60 feet. Every other residential district, single family residential district, it's only 25 feet. That complies with modern development. So switching it to RE would allow for a more traditional residential style of development rather than these large estate lots, which some of them don't even comply to. Not very many, but some don't, of the existing lots don't comply to.
Does it mean in a practical sense for me or somebody out there listening that these sites then may be able to develop more housing on the sites?
Certainly, yes. For example, the North Dunn properties, there's a handful up there, I think 12, I could be wrong on that number, but they're roughly 200 feet wide. So each of those could be subdivided into two based on the required minimum lot width of 100 feet. So you could potentially have twice the development in an area like that.
Thank you, Mr. Roebling.
Are there any other questions on Ordinance 2122? Seeing none, we'll go to the public. If any member of the public would like to comment on Ordinance 2122, removal of the residential estate district, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can send a chat message to the meeting host. Mr. Lucas, are you seeing any public commenters?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, we'll wait just another moment. Still nothing?
Not that I see.
All right, we'll come back to council members. Are there any comments on Ordinance 2122? Well, I'll just comment and say I'm very glad to see this. I thought RE was a type of zoning district we should not have within city limits. It's more of a rural district in my view, so I'm glad to support this particular ordinance. Do we have a motion?
Move to pass on Ordinance 2122.
Second.
All right. Councilmember Sandberg.
Yes.
Councilmember Scambaluri,
Yes.
Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Councilmember Volin,
Yes.
Councilmember Sims,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Rallo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flaherty,
Yes.
and I will also vote yes. So that's a do pass recommendation of 9-0. And I believe that concludes our agenda for the evening. So thank you all for your participation, and we'll see you at the regular session next week.